Welcome to this explainer. Okay, I want you to imagine a thought experiment so incredibly dark, it literally questions the very foundation of our existence. Today, we're diving into Thomas Ligotti's The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. This is a book that dares to ask, what if human consciousness itself is just a tragic evolutionary mistake? We're going to unpack this fascinating, deeply pessimistic philosophy, layer by layer, and see exactly what it's all about.
Right out of the gate, Ligotti hits us with a thesis that goes against literally every survival instinct we have. I mean, overwhelmingly, people believe that being alive is essentially all right. But Ligotti, he argues the exact opposite. He suggests that the evolution of human consciousness was a massive misstep, creating a species capable of actually conceptualizing its own doom. He famously calls this consciousness the parent of all horrors. It's like we're placed in a nightmare where we are uniquely cursed with the terrifying knowledge of our own mortality and suffering.
To really grasp this, think of a specific species of prehistoric deer. As the story goes, it evolved these magnificent, sprawling antlers to attract mates and fight off rivals. But over time, these antlers grew so massive and heavy that they eventually crushed the deer to the ground, leading straight to its extinction. Drawing on the Norwegian philosopher Peter Wessel-Zapffe, Ligotti compares human self-awareness to those overgrown antlers. Our highly evolved minds, which were designed for survival, have basically become this unbearable, paralyzing weight.
And this thought experiment leads us to a highly controversial concept, antinatalism. Since Ligotti views consciousness as an inherent tragedy, just a constant state of suffering and dread, he aligns with the view that non-existence is infinitely preferable to the burden of being alive. The most logical and frankly compassionate thing humanity could do, he argues, is simply stop reproducing and peacefully opt out of the game entirely.
Section 1. The Pedigree of Pessimism.
Now, Ligotti didn't just invent this dark outlook in a vacuum. Philosophical pessimism actually has a really rigorous centuries-old intellectual lineage. Back in the 19th century, Arthur Schopenhauer introduced the idea of a blind will, this mindless, untiring master of all being that essentially forces us to suffer. Then came Philip Meinlander, who argued that humanity is actually driven by a hidden will to die. Fast forward to 1933, and Peter Wessel-Zapffe pens The Last Messiah, which directly inspired Ligotti's view of consciousness as an evolutionary blunder. Today, thinkers like David Benatar and Ligotti continue this lineage, challenging our deepest assumptions about the value of existence.
To give you an idea of just how deeply these philosophers felt about their ideas, consider this incredibly striking historical anecdote. Philip Botts, who wrote under the name Philip Meinlander, didn't just write about the will to die. On April 1, 1876, at just 34 years old, he stacked copies of his newly published massive philosophical work, stood on top of them, and hanged himself. It was a tragic, literal manifestation of his philosophy. Some even called it the final will and testament of his absolute conviction that non-existence was the ultimate goal.
Section 2. 4 Ways to Hide.
So you're probably wondering, if human consciousness is really this horrifying, why haven't we all just gone completely mad? How do we even get out of bed in the morning? Well, Peter Wessel-Zapffe outlined 4 brilliant strategies we use to artificially limit our consciousness so we can survive. First, at the most basic level, is isolation. We just sweep the terrifying facts of life into a dark corner of our minds. Second is anchoring. We cling to grand metaphysical certainties like morality, our nation, or family to feel secure. Third is distraction. We obsess over television, careers, or hobbies to keep from looking at the void. And fourth, the most complex one, is sublimation. This is the rare technique where we take our existential dread and transform it into art, philosophy, or tragedy.
Because we rely so heavily on these 4 mechanisms, Ligotti argues we basically transform into biological paradoxes. We possess this vast consciousness, but we spend almost all our energy trying not to be conscious of our true reality. In order to survive our own minds, we deceive ourselves. We dance on a wheel of lies, turning ourselves into what he calls the undead and the human puppet. We are actors merely playing the role of living, rather than genuinely confronting existence.
Section 3. The Science of Denial.
But wait, is this all just dark poetry? Fascinatingly enough, empirical psychology seems to back this up. Look at the incredible overlap between Zapf's philosophical coping mechanisms and Ernest Becker's terror management theory. TMT provides hard psychological data showing that humans construct cultural worldviews and strive for self-esteem specifically to buffer their deep underlying terror of death. Science actually supports the idea that our social games and grand societal structures are essentially just defense mechanisms against existential dread.
And this goes even deeper when you look at a field called existential neuroscience. German neurophilosopher Thomas Metzinger famously argues in his book, Being No One, that the subjective self is actually a biological illusion. We are, at our core, simply information processing systems. This perfectly aligns with Ligotti's assertion. Our brain manufactures this comforting illusion of a unified, important self just to keep the biological machine functioning without breaking down from despair.
A perfect, mind-blowing example of our brain manufacturing comfort is the famous God helmet experiment by Michael Persinger. By simply modifying a motorcycle helmet to project magnetic fields into the brain, Persinger could artificially induce intense, supernatural sensations in his subjects. I mean, some felt the presence of ghosts, others literally felt God. It brilliantly illustrates Ligotti's point. Our brains are hardwired to manufacture comforting illusions and profound meanings, shielding us from the cold, mechanical reality of the universe.
Section 4. True Detective and Terrestrial Horror.
Now, if these dense philosophical concepts sound familiar to any television fans out there, there's a very specific reason for that. Back in 2014, the acclaimed first season of HBO's True Detective aired, and viewers were introduced to Rust Cohle. Show creator Nick Pizzolatto heavily utilized Ligotti's antinatalist philosophy, sometimes adapting texts directly from The Conspiracy Against the Human Race right into Cohle's iconic pessimistic dialogue. While it sparked a controversy about plagiarism versus homage, it undeniably proved that Ligotti's brand of philosophical despair could deeply captivate a mainstream audience.
But True Detective did something really unique with Ligotti's worldview. Traditionally, this stuff is framed as cosmic horror, think H.P. Lovecraft, where humanity is simply meaningless and completely irrelevant against the vastness of the cosmos. But scholars point out that True Detective actually created terrestrial horror. In this framework, humanity isn't irrelevant, we are highly relevant, and we are directly, culpably responsible for the literal, environmental destruction of our own world.
The television series masterfully uses the physical landscape of Louisiana to show this. When you watch the show, pay attention to the background. You constantly see these omnipresent power lines, massive chemical plants, and sinking clay foundations. The series literalizes humanity's self-destruction. The horror isn't some ancient monster from the stars. The horror is the industrial squalor and the severe flooding pointing directly to an immediate future where the setting itself will just be swallowed by the sea.
Bringing this all full circle, the massive, award-winning success of True Detective is actually the perfect real-world example of Zopf's fourth coping mechanism, sublimation. The creators took paralyzing existential dread about the end of humanity, stylized it with brilliant acting and cinematography, and packaged it into highly consumable Sunday night entertainment. We literally escape our real suffering by enjoying a beautifully crafted simulation of it.
Section 5. A Philosopher's Bedtime Story.
As we begin our ascent back up from this intellectual abyss, even Ligotti makes a surprisingly grounded admission. He writes that the hell of human consciousness is, ultimately, just a philosopher's bedtime story. It's a terrifying tale we might contemplate in the dark, but it's one we almost universally brush aside when our morning alarms ring. We get up, we go to work, we buy groceries. The human machine is simply too perfectly designed for survival to hit the off switch over a philosophical argument.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. As you go about your day, consider this. Is our innate drive to live, our inherent optimism, truly just a biological illusion designed to keep us from seeing the horror of existence? Or is the profound intellectual despair of pessimism, with all its grand theories of nothingness, just another elaborate, comforting distraction, just another way the human puppet dances? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the reality around you.